Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachael Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. Well, good people with good bodies, it is an honor to be with you again today, and it is my desire to bring some words of grounding and some words of hope at such a time as this. And I should confess that this is probably my 172nd recording of this podcast. I tease, but in all seriousness, I just want to echo that I come myself in a very human-sized way with fragmentation and numbness and the impact of the isolation that we're in the midst of and the overwhelming feelings of wanting to love well and be a good human and have courage and exhibit faith, hope, and love, and also radically accepting that this is a season that reveals, it exposes, and it traumatizes. So I also come to you kind of messy today, and I've been thinking a lot about a podcast that Dan and I did, I think a year ago, about being unwell. And I guess I come to you today owning fully and naming with a sense of humility my own unwellness. I find this week that the reality of all that is playing out with this global pandemic and the multitude of complex realities connected to it, how it's exposing so many systems of injustice that already heap heavy burdens on people. And so something like a global pandemic just exposes and heaps more burdens upon burden, holding the reality that this is a collective trauma, but it's not one we come to equitably. And I know there are many of us listening today who could say, yes, I already had significant places of trauma I experienced, whether it's the abuse or chronic poverty or food scarcity or racism or gendered violence, just these realities that we live in a world that already bears a unique sense of suffering. And so when you add a more collective and pervasive trauma like a global pandemic, it only compounds those things. So I speak today with a tenderness and a humility and a human-sizedness that in many ways we are unwell at this time. And I know that our audience is very diverse and that there are families who are homeschooling children of multiple ages. I know there are families who have college-age kids who are back living in your home. I know there are single people who are having to bear the unique suffering of being isolated in a totally different way, that though you might love the realities of your independence and maybe the space you live in, to be forced into isolation without touch, without a deeper connection to community is a very heavy burden to bear. I know that we have those who have already been struggling with disability or disease and might be feeling resentful that people are just waking up to some of the realities you have to live with every day. And I know we have folks who are on the front lines of the healthcare industry, seeking to bring your expertise and your courage while being under kind of some lack of protection with protective equipment and some of the resources that you need to actually serve your patients well, while you also are tending to your own families. And I know there are many of you who are still working in grocery stores and drugstores and food industry and public service and on front lines in a totally different way and having to bear some of the reality of people's traumatized unkindness. I know most people are not very kind in seasons of crisis. And I would imagine there is pervasive fear in the midst of this. And I just want to name the reality of those of you who are bearing the very pervasive trauma of racism at such a time as this, especially our Asian and Asian American brothers and sisters who are bearing a unique reality that has been perpetuated by those in our leadership. And as the FBI warned this week, are experiencing a higher volume of hate crimes and discrimination. And there's just such deep heartache and terror in that just adds to the terror of actually being afraid of getting a virus. And it's not lost on me that there are many listening who may have either already lost someone to the impact of the coronavirus and COVID-19, or who are in the midst of being with someone or yourself suffering from the impact of this virus. And so, again, these are very, very hard days. And as Christians, we are not bound to our suffering as the definitive end of things. We don't have to be slaves to fear. But I also think part of being people of hope is naming the truth, so that as we seek to move with more imagination, with more compassion, we actually can be honest about what it is we're dealing with. I don't think God is afraid of our reality. If we profess that God is indeed good and bigger than even a virus, then we also can trust that God can hold all that we feel and all that we're experiencing. As the people of God, I do not think in any way we are meant to give our hearts over to despair or to believe that death has the final say. We are Easter people intrinsically, inside and out. But it's because we're Easter people that we can be honest about our suffering. And I feel this week has been a week in which my body is catching up to the reality of all of this. I don't know about you, so I won't project my experience on you. But I think I tend to be more anxious. So when crisis comes, when trauma is present, I can move more towards mania, toward a kind of vigilance to pay attention to what's going on, a kind of preparation to hunker down and move into kind of a survival. And I think this week is the week my body is saying, hey, love that you need to feel volition, love that you need to feel empowered. And I'm exhausted. And I feel a different kind of heaviness as the reality that this is going to be longer than we anticipated or would have ever imagined. Having to radically accept that we are, in fact, in the midst of a global pandemic, that social distancing as the most faithful act of protecting our loved ones and neighbors and all who we are called to love is going to persist for a while, that there are economic and psychological and physical complexities that are going to continue to play out and compound. These are overwhelming things. And this week, I find myself probably more on the depression end of the spectrum in having to come to terms with, I have to find a new way to live in the midst of these realities. We have to find new rhythms and rituals and ways to live in the midst of these realities. And I'm tired. And my mania is wearing me down. So I don't know how you've been coping, but I have now deep cleaned the kitchen, like really deep cleaned. I have deep cleaned our back porch with my own hands and a washcloth, like wiped down every part of the porch, the deck, the paneling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I potted as many plants as I could that we had kind of prepared for before things needed to start closing and shutting down. I've been doing all the laundry and making sure everything's, clean and disinfected. And the truth is, it has not been able to keep my sadness and my fear completely at bay. And so as we find ourselves on this precipice of Holy Week, the end of our Lenten journey, I've been asking Jesus, what is it that we can do in the midst of this season, this unique season in our Christian calendar, to maybe experiencing something of you that could minister to us and therefore equip us to minister to others. And I have been kind of combating some of my own tendencies to need to center myself in the story, to start with the question of how can I be like Jesus? What does Holy Week have to show me about how I can follow in the way of Jesus? And I want to invite us to actually take a deep breath and let there be a pause before we move there. Because the reality is, as Easter people, that is how we live. As Easter people, how do we live as though the resurrection is more true than death, and therefore give the best of our resources, our skills, our gifts, our hearts, and our love to bring about God's reality in this world in a different way? But I want to suggest that what we might be invited to this particular Holy Week is a different kind of reflection, a different kind of taking in who Jesus is. So I want to invite us as followers of Jesus to maybe spend this Holy Week slowing down. Tomorrow is Palm Sunday, and we will journey with the stories of Jesus that took place as he made his way to the cross, into Holy Saturday, and into Resurrection Sunday. So we spend time with these stories of Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem on a donkey. We spend stories with Jesus turning over tables in the temple, being anointed by women with expensive oils in preparation for his burial, serving a feast to his friends and disciples to try to empower them and minister to them and help them to see what this kingdom, what it means that God came to be with us, what it would mean to love and to participate in this unfolding kingdom on the other side of Easter. We spend time in the garden with Jesus as he laments the agony of what is facing him, his terror and his fear and his pain, his loneliness. And we spend time with his faithfulness and his journey to the cross, his descent into hell, and his incredible power and vulnerability victory over death. So what would it look like this week to slow down and to spend time focusing on the faithfulness of Jesus? Holy Week and the Lenten experience are meant to be a preparation of our hearts and our minds and our bodies to really take in what our baptism means. So what if the invitation for you this week is to allow the one who is most faithful, trusting in the goodness of God, who was faithful to the very end of his mission and remains faithful today? What would it look like for you to maybe get to encounter the Jesus who contends in righteous anger with systems of injustice? What would it look like for you to experience the tender Jesus who moves gently, even in his triumphal entry, who moves gently at the table, who moves gently at the garden, the one who tends to wounds and tends to hearts, who comforts? What would it be like for you to encounter and experience the Jesus who laments in the garden? The great high priest who goes ever before us, who does not minimize human heartache and despair, but gives voice to it. What would it look like for you to spend time with the Jesus who sets a table to bring nourishment and who washes feet? Where do you need to encounter the Jesus who contends? Where do you need to encounter the Jesus who comforts? Where do you need to encounter the Jesus who laments? Where do you need to encounter the Jesus who nourishes and serves and washes your feet? It could feel really counterintuitive and maybe even self-indulgent to slow down at such a time as this, when there's such a feeling of urgency that is real and true. And I'm not saying to cease from necessary activity or cease from bringing your gifts and resources in the places you're called to in this moment. I'm simply inviting us to realize that this is a long season we're in. And in order to be faithful and in order to be sustainable, in order to let our imagination grow, we need to be grounded and rooted and firmly acquainted with Jesus, the one who sits at the right hand of the Father, the one who is our great high priest and goes ever before us, not as a disembodied, abstract God, but one who is so well acquainted with our humanity, the best parts of it and the worst parts of it. So I actually think if we can allow Jesus to minister to us, to show us these places where he is the good shepherd, the one who goes before us. The Lord is my shepherd, as the psalmist tells us in Psalm 23. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along righteous paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love and mercy will follow me all of the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I'm inviting us to let that be our guiding frame for this Holy Week as we journey with Jesus to the cross. And I'm wondering what it would look like then to be people who contend, who are righteously angry about injustice. This is a time, again, that is exposing all kinds of systems of our world that I actually think are anti-Christ, anti-gospel. And we have an opportunity to bring our voice, our power, and our resources to bring about change. And I want to just give you one really tangible way you can do that. If you're like, you know what, right now I just need imagination for one. You can go to the Asian American Christian Collaborative.com. Let me say that again. Asian American Christian Collaborative.com. And you can learn and hear from some of our Asian American brothers and sisters who are Christians, who are asking for their faces and bodies and hearts and stories to be seen with more clarity. And you can bring your voice and you can follow some of their action steps in your faith communities, in your families, in our government. And you can stand in solidarity with those who are experiencing a unique kind of violence right now. You can follow Jesus into all of the particular places because of your story, because of your access, because of your relationships, that you feel compelled to take a stand, to say hell no against areas of injustice. How might the comfort and tenderness of Jesus teach us and invite us to repentance and different ways of tending to our own hearts, minds, and bodies? I will say it again. In a time of trauma, you have to tend to your body. Comfort is one of the best ways to tend to your body. How do you experience comfort? Is it yoga? Is it long walks? Is it being held by someone who loves you, that you love? Is it taking a warm bath? Is it cooking a meal that just brings you delight? Is it putting your hands in soil or laying out in the grass? Or cleaning? Or doing something that allows your body to feel comforted? It can feel frivolous, but this is a season that actually demands that you grow new skills and new rituals to tend to your body. How might the Jesus who laments in the garden bring a presence with you in the midst of grief that allows your body to find a different kind of rest, a different kind of expression? Lament is the language of hope. It involves protest and it involves sorrow. And it ultimately says, this is not the way things are meant to be. And yet, God, I seek your face. I believe I will see the goodness of God again in the land of the living. Are there places in the week ahead that you need to make space for lament in your body, in your home, in your heart? I am aware that could feel really threatening right now. Like maybe you wouldn't recover, but some of the exhaustion you're feeling, some of the aches and pains and sleeplessness might actually be because you need to give some expression to grief and the losses that you've experienced in this season, in the pain and heartache and suffering that's playing out in your own home and life and family and in the world around you. Lament is a communal act. So, and even though right now we might be physically isolated from each other, there's still a way our spirits are united through the Holy Spirit. And so are there places you need permission to cry out to God or to just have a big cry? What would it look like to let the nourishing Jesus feed you, to set a table before you? How might that impact your imagination for one, taking in nourishment and also feeding those in your midst? I know this is a hard season to know how to serve and love people without, but you can donate money to food banks. That's one of the best ways to help local food banks, is to give them money to keep replenishing their resources and their stock to provide for those in need. Maybe when you make a meal, you save a little bit to give to someone who's working in the healthcare world or who's working in a grocery store, or someone in your family or your neighbors who you know, an elderly neighbor who might just really appreciate a warm meal that they don't feel able to go out and get for themselves. I think when we're nourished, it changes how we nourish other people. If we can let the Jesus who contends, who comforts, who grieves, and who nourishes us be more present at a moment such as this, I am fully confident then we will live faithfully as Easter people on the other side of Easter Sunday. So will you give yourself permission to slow down a little bit this week? And instead of bringing more indictment against yourself about ways that you need to be living better, can you fix your eyes on Jesus? Can you look for Jesus in the stories? Can you actually borrow from his faithfulness, from his hope, from his love, and see how that might restore, how it might bring a different kind of rest, and how it might bring a different kind of imagination for this season that we find ourselves in? I really speak blessing to each and every one of you. And I do hope you feel just that deep sense that I bring this to you in my full humanity and all the complexity that is playing out in my own world as well. And so I just say we will continue to get through this together, and we'll take it one day at a time.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.